They handed my clutter list to a 29-year-old who couldn't find the file. I might said him walking to Malphus with a moving box. I didn't say a ward. I didn't say of the refort. I didn't say to hoard. I did hint thee to. Let me back up. My name is Owen Schraft. I'm 54. For 22 years I was the top revenue producer at Callaway Financial Partners. Not the loudest, not the most visible. The one who actually closed. The one institutional clients called when a deal was complicated enough that no one else would touch it. I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened. This isn't a story about bitterness. I'm not bitter. I was for about 3 weeks. Then I got to work. The day it started, the day the whole thing really started, was a Tuesday in February. Cold morning. I remember because I'd driven in early to prep for a call with a client in Zurich. 22-year relationship. His grandfather had trusted my predecessor. His father had trusted me. Now he trusted me. You don't build that kind of thing with a pitch deck. You build it with 2 decades of picking up the phone when it's inconvenient and knowing what the man actually needs before he finishes his sentence. I was at my desk by 6:45. By 7:10, my managing partner had sent a calendar invite for 9 a.m. No subject line. Just the two of us and the firm's new managing director. I knew what it was. I'd felt it coming for months. Small things at first. My name left off a distribution list for a client event. A younger associate CC'd on emails that used to come only to me. The new managing director, he'd been brought in 8 months earlier from a consulting firm on the West Coast, late 30s, very good at talking about the future, had started using a phrase that I recognized immediately. The firm needs to evolve its client-facing profile. That's the polished version. What it means is, you're old. I sat in that 9 a.m. meeting and they told me I was being transitioned to an advisory capacity. Reduced book. Reduced compensation. They'd be reassigning my primary accounts to newer advisors who could offer clients a more contemporary service experience. I didn't argue. I asked 2 questions. One about my contractual notice period, one about the status of a specific client agreement I negotiated 4 years earlier. The managing director answered the first. He didn't know the answer to the second. I thanked them both and walked out. In the hallway, one of the junior associates, a young woman named Callie, who'd started 8 months ago and was sharp as anyone I'd ever worked with, caught my eye and gave me the smallest apologetic nod. She knew what had just happened. She also knew enough not to say it out loud. Back at my desk, I sent 3 emails. Calm, professional, nothing remarkable. Then I opened a document I'd started 5 months earlier, not because I'm paranoid, because I've seen this happen to other people and I understood what it looked like from a distance well before I could see it clearly up close. Let me tell you about the document. 4 months before that Tuesday meeting, I'd been sitting late in the office finishing notes from a call with one of my larger accounts. A family office out of Denver, 3rd generation, substantial assets. Their patriarch had specifically requested in writing that any transition of their account be approved personally by him before execution. He was old-fashioned about paperwork. I loved that about him. I made sure that language was reflected formally, not buried somewhere, formally documented, acknowledged by the firm's compliance team and countersigned. I hadn't done it for this reason. I'd done it because it was the right thing to do for the client. But sitting in my office that night, I looked at that document and I thought, this matters more than anyone in this building realizes. Over the following weeks, I went through every significant client relationship I managed. Not all of them had similar protections in place, but the ones that did, 7 out of my top 12, I documented carefully. Relationship history, specific contractual language, outside counsel I'd already quietly consulted. Nothing aggressive, just accurate. The managing director had made a mistake, not an unusual one for someone who'd spent his career moving between firms and thinking of client relationships as balance sheet line items. He assumed that because he controlled the firm's infrastructure, the CRM, the email addresses, the stationery, he controlled the relationships. He didn't understand that the infrastructure was just the address. The relationship lived somewhere else entirely. Here's what happened when they handed my accounts to the 29-year-old. His name was Cooper. Nice kid, genuinely. He wasn't the villain in this. He was just eager and completely unprepared for what he was walking into. They gave him my files on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, he'd sent an introductory email to the Denver family office, form language, warm but generic, and the patriarch had forwarded it to me within 20 minutes with a single line, "Owen, what is this?" I called him back. Not to complain, not to poison the well. I explained professionally that the firm had decided to restructure some account coverage. He asked me directly if this had been approved through the process we'd agreed to. I told him honestly that it had not. He thanked me and ended the call. On Monday, his attorney contacted the firm. I wasn't in those conversations, but I heard enough through legitimate channels to know that the managing director spent most of that week in meetings he hadn't expected to have. The Denver family office wasn't the only one. Of my 7 accounts with formal protective language, 4 of them pushed back within the first 2 weeks. Not because anyone organized them, because the relationships were real and the clients paid attention and they hadn't agreed to be reassigned like office furniture. Meanwhile, I'd done something else. 3 months before that Tuesday meeting, I'd had coffee with a former colleague who'd left the industry to start a boutique advisory firm. Small operation, excellent reputation, focused on exactly the kind of complex multi-generational client relationships I'd spent 22 years building. We'd stayed in touch casually over the years. I reached out more deliberately in the fall because I saw the writing on the wall, and I believed in being honest with myself about it. We had coffee, then lunch, then a longer conversation about what I might bring to what he was building. By January, we had a preliminary understanding, nothing signed. I was still employed and I wasn't going to behave otherwise, but an understanding. The day after the managing director's attorney called about the Denver situation, my former colleague called me. He'd heard through the industry that things at Callaway were shifting. He asked if the timing might be right to move our conversation forward. I told him I thought it might be. I want to be careful here because I know what this sounds like and I want to be precise. I didn't poach clients. I didn't make a single phone call to a client. I was still employed to serve, telling them to follow me. What I did was resign professionally, give appropriate notice, and provide the firm with a clean transition memo for every account. Then I joined my former colleague's firm. What happened after that was the client's choice. I can't control that. I wouldn't try to. But here's the thing about 22 years of relationships built on actually showing up. When the Denver Patriarchs team was evaluating their options after the contractual dispute with Callaway, they did their research. They called people they trusted. They found out where I'd landed. They made their own decision. The managing director found out on a Wednesday. His assistant, someone I'd worked alongside for years and who I genuinely liked, texted me a single word that afternoon: "Wow." I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. Over the next 4 months, 6 of my 7 protected accounts moved their relationships to my new firm. The 7th stayed at Callaway because their in-house team had a strong preference to maintain continuity with a specific associate there. I respected that. You have to respect that if you believe in what you say you believe in. The revenue impact on Callaway was significant enough that the managing director's performance review that spring was, from what I heard, a different kind of conversation than he'd anticipated. Cooper, the 29-year-old, actually called me about 2 months after I left, not about business. He was frustrated. He'd been handed accounts he wasn't equipped to service and set up to fail through no fault of his own. He was too smart not to see it. We talked for about half an hour. I gave him the most honest advice I could about what to do next. He deserved that. I want to tell you the moment I remember most clearly from all of this, because it's not the one you might expect. It wasn't when the Denver family office moved. It wasn't when I heard about the managing director's spring review. The moment I remember is from a Thursday afternoon in early April. I was sitting in a much smaller office than I'd had at Callaway. Different view. A parking structure instead of the skyline. I had a cup of coffee that had gone cold because I'd gotten absorbed in work, and my former colleague knocked on the door and came in and sat down across from me and put a folder on my desk. "The Henderson account," he said. "They want to expand the relationship. They're asking specifically for you to lead." The Henderson account was one I'd built from scratch 17 years ago. A single conversation at an industry conference that turned into a meeting, that turned into a relationship, that turned into the kind of trust that doesn't appear on a pitch deck. They'd found out I was here the same way anyone finds out anything in this industry. They talked to people they knew. I opened the folder, skimmed the numbers, set it down. "Okay," I said. That was it. No celebration. Just back to work. That's what 22 years actually feels like when it's real. It's not a ceremony. It's just the work continuing in a room where the work is valued. The managing director was let go from Callaway 14 months after I left. I only know because an old colleague mentioned it in passing. The firm had restructured its leadership team following what was described carefully as a period of elevated client attrition. I didn't feel triumphant about it. I felt tired in the way you feel when something that should have been avoided simply wasn't. Cooper, the 29-year-old, joined a different firm in the Midwest. Mid-size. Good culture, from what I understand. He'll be fine. He figured out faster than most that he'd been used as a prop, and that's actually a valuable thing to understand early. I'm still at the boutique firm. 3 years in now, we've grown. The clients we serve are the kind who've been around long enough to know the difference between a relationship and a transaction. They know which one they're getting. My old office at Callaway, the corner one with the skyline view I'd had for 11 years, was converted into a small conference room 6 months after I left. I heard that from Callie, the sharp young associate, who eventually came to work with us too. She said they put a whiteboard where my desk used to be. I thought about that for a minute, then I thought about the Henderson file sitting on my desk and the call I had the next morning with a client whose grandfather I'd met in this business, and the fact that I would never once in my career stand on a stage and accept an award for work someone else had done. There's a particular kind of satisfaction in that. Not loud, not photographable, just the steady, specific weight of knowing exactly what you built and watching it hold. I still have the first business card I ever had printed at Callaway. 22 years ago. The paper's gone soft at the edges. I found it in a drawer when I was clearing out my desk on my last day there, and I held it for a second, and then I put it in my jacket pocket and carried it out of the building. It's in my desk here now. Same drawer, different desk. Some things you keep not because they're trophies, but because they're accurate. Because they remind you that what you built was real before anyone tried to tell you it wasn't. The managing director wanted a more contemporary client-facing profile. He got one. It just wasn't at his firm. I've thought a lot about why things unfolded the way they did. Not to congratulate myself, I'm genuinely past that, but because I think there's something honest worth saying about it. The managing director wasn't stupid. That's the part people get wrong when they hear a story like this. He was smart enough to rise to that position, smart enough to read a room, smart enough to build a case for why the firm needed to look different going forward. What he lacked wasn't intelligence. It was the specific kind of wisdom that only comes from having your name on something that fails. He'd never lost a client because of his own misjudgment. He'd never sat across from someone who trusted him and had to explain why he'd made the wrong call. So he didn't know what that weight felt like, and because he didn't know, he didn't account for it. I had lost clients before, early in my career, twice. Both times because I moved too fast and listened too little. Both times I had to make the call, sit with the silence on the other end, and figure out how to rebuild something I'd damaged. That's not a pleasant education, but it's the only real one there is in this work. It taught me that a client relationship isn't a contract. It's a bet someone is making on your judgment and your character, renewed every single time something goes wrong, and you handle it right. When the managing director decided to reassign my accounts without any real understanding of what held them together, he was treating those bets like assets on a spreadsheet. You can't transfer a bet. You can only earn a new one. Cooper understood this faster than I expected, and I respect him for it. He called me, he asked the right questions, he didn't pretend the situation was something other than what it was. That kind of honesty at 29 is rarer than any credential. He'll build something real if he keeps that instinct. Callie figured it out even faster. She saw the whole thing clearly from inside the building while it was happening, which is harder than it sounds. Most people in that position look away because looking costs something. She didn't look away. That's character operating under pressure. And it's the thing that actually can't be hired or trained or acquired in a weekend seminar. What I want to say, and I want to say it plainly, is that none of what happened was luck. It wasn't luck that the Denver family had protective language in their agreement. It wasn't luck that I'd maintained 22 years of relationships that lived outside the firm's infrastructure. It wasn't luck that my former colleague and I had stayed in honest contact for years before I ever needed anything from him. Every one of those things was a choice I made at some earlier point, for reasons that had nothing to do with protecting myself. That's the part that matters. The protection was a consequence of doing the right thing consistently, not the goal of it. When you spend 2 decades actually caring about the outcome for the person across the table from you, not the commission, not the recognition, the actual outcome, the care accumulates somewhere. It doesn't disappear when someone decides you're no longer useful. It's already in the room, in the files, in the relationships. It's the thing that was there before you arrived and stays after you leave. I'm not suggesting it always works out this cleanly. It doesn't. Some people do everything right and still get buried, and the person who buried them keeps getting promoted. I've watched that happen too. But I do believe, based on nothing more mystical than observation over a long career, that the accumulation matters. The way you treat the people who can't do anything for you matters. The care you bring to the work when no one is looking matters, not because the universe is keeping score, but because you are. And the person you're becoming through all those small, unseen choices is the person who will either hold up or won't when the moment actually arrives. Owen held up. And not because he planned for revenge. Because he spent 22 years being the kind of person who didn't need to.